Hello and welcome to the second subpool. Again, as before, this is the second three subpools. The top two contestants will be moving on to the champion pool. I don't think, everyone here is one of the big three, so no explicit highlights. But up first we have Wings of Gold by Floof up against Large Terran Supply Fleet by Climhazzard. Now, Floof made some aesthetic choices here. You can see he's got the gold outer sections of these giant ships, but the gold sections are segments rather than armor, which are not exactly all that durable. We'll see how those hold up. I'm hoping it works out well for him because he is using a lot of them throughout his fleet. But he's got a good array of annihilators and plasma bolts across his fleet in general, but I'm concerned about their longevity. The fleet from Climhazzard, this is almost surely evil stacking, I believe. We've got missiles and a whole lot of thrusters on that guy. So what do we have here? Torpedoes and some proton swords. So this thing's probably going to end up trying to ram everything. We'll see how well that goes for it. These little guys just have torpedo launchers. This is the missile guy with that being covered in thrust. And the large freighter here. We've seen this sort of freighter design from Climhazzard before, and they make excellent damage sponges. And the plasma cannons down the spine of the ship will actually do a pretty good job against pretty much everything they get close to. And we can see first blood going in favor of Climhazzard. And you can see a little bit of time dilation happening, if I may understate. But but as expected, we're seeing a lot of Floof's, at least smaller ships, go down pretty quickly. I'm interested in seeing exactly how long these guys are going to last. There's a lot of missiles throughout Floof's fleet, which the Sentinel missiles fire very quickly and they track pretty well, but overall they're very expensive for the damage output that they have. So using them as a primary damage source is usually not too effective. He does have a bunch of the Sentinel cannons to back up, but I'm feeling like Climhazzard's just got a colossal advantage in this matchup. That said, the Floof also did another thing we don't see too often with the Sentinels. So the Sentinel armor squares are 2x2, whereas most things are designed around a grid, but the Terran faction, for example, most of their armor blocks are going to end up being 3x3 armor blocks, because 3x3 works very conveniently with weapon sizes and all that. Whereas the 2x2 is a little less convenient when you're setting everything up, especially with the thrusters. The thrusters are 3 blocks wide. So, for example, here we've got one block of space, you can fit thrusters in it. But here, the armor blocks are only 2x2, so you have to do a bunch of weird shit in order to get your thrusters to fit. You have to stack them or create odd spaces. But one of the things that Floof did, I need to zoom out a little bit so it's a little less noisy. One of the things that Floof did with his design, though, is he surrounded the armor blocks with the 2 to 3 adapter armor plates, which have the same HP density as the rest of the armor plates, but they're rather thin, which means they're still pretty vulnerable to splash damage. But even if you kill the adapters, you can see the armor blocks are still floating around and taking hits. So that is kind of neat. It's not something that we see very often, but I think at that point it was just too late for that ship. Yeah, these ships that look vaguely like something from another game that involves some spacecraft from time to time. They're rather neat looking, but I don't think, at least in this matchup, I think Climhazzard just has too much durability and enough damage output to seal the deal. They are rather interesting looking, however. The supply ship from Climhazzard seems to have decided that it's just fine to sit back and shoot missiles instead of using all those plasma cannons it's got. Although now something made the mistake of getting too close. It's easy to forget just how immense these supply ships that Climhazzard submits are. You can see he has to use a ton of thrust just to meet the mobility requirement, and it's almost all forward. He's only got a little bit of turning thrust in the front. But a really good example, and that's too damn bright. But like I said, the 3x3 armor blocks are every one of these is a 3x3 armor block. The freighter is gigantic. A behemoth of a ship. And here, yeah, Floof's fleet tried, but the Climhazzard came in here to win it. And he's taking no prisoners. Now you can see the sluggishness out of the freighter. It's not a terribly significant factor yet, or at this point, but the freighter is barely left from where it was initially fighting. But next up we have Floof up against Exterp 7. Exterp 7 is another Sentinel fleet, this time relying a bit more on the cannons and a bit less on the missiles, although Exterp 7 brought a bunch of factories as well, which is, because resources are off in this tournament, factories are literally just wasted budget. We'll see how they hold up, but you can see he's got a bunch of his ships that spawned on top of each other, which is always less than ideal, and Sentinels are uniquely adept at spawning on top of each other. I'm not even sure what it is exactly about them, but Sentinel submissions do it all the time. And here you can see we've got Exterp 7 off to a rather good start. The cannons really doing their job pretty effectively. Although in order to use them he has to move within range of Floof's cannons, which could give some advantage to Floof's fleet due to the size of his ships, as long as those big guys stay distracted. But It does look like Floof is starting to run low on distractions. Sentinel cannons really are extraordinarily good weapons. As you can see them just doing business. But the way the last round went, I wouldn't be too surprised if this one went about the same. Exterp 7's fleet making a very strong showing, using plenty of bullets. Also, I'm sure I've mentioned it a few times before, but Sentinels, one of the other neat facts about them is that as a percentage of their total weapon lineup, they have more explosive weapons than anyone else. They actually only have one weapon that isn't explosive, and that's the gauze beam that's currently destroyed. But everything else the Sentinels have has a blast radius of some kind. So, you know, fun fact of the day. And yeah, before there were borders, Tinkerel snipers were just unmanageable because they would score points on hit and then just never show up again. The meta has shifted quite a bit too with the way the score system was changed about a year and a half ago or whatever, where the maximum points you can score is equal to the total fleet budget the other person used. Before, Sentinels would lose a lot of the time on points because they would just give up a ton of points to whoever was shooting at them, because Sentinel armor just gave massive gobs of points. But now we've got Flypaste showing up here. We've got this little guy with some missiles. We've got some plasma cannons, looks like a bunch of mortars to go along with them, and a few more missiles on there. Torpedo guy with some blast pulsers for anti-missile defense. Let's see what else we've got here. Heavy torpedoes, or a heavy torpedo guy of some kind. We've got, looks like antimatters. Looks like a pretty well-rounded fleet. Flypaste likes to submit very well-rounded fleets in general, and fully expecting this one to do rather well. But I'm waiting for him to discharge the gauze beams are the only Sentinel weapon that doesn't have a splash radius, which is one of the reasons Sentinels are so hard for everyone else to fight, is that everything they do hits in an area. And Annihilators have one of the larger splash radii in the game, especially given their cost and damage per second. And yeah, Climhazzard, you missed the first subpool. You were in that one because it was your second submission. And Flypaste making a very strong showing. Barely any of his fleet's blood on the field. And actually, these antimatter ships are following a new design aesthetic too. You can see a lot of Flypaste ships have this kind of wavy sort of structure to them. You can see in the back it's a little wider, and then it narrows in the middle, and then in the front it gets wider again. But the antimatter ships are more A-frame type design. So I think Flypaste is working on a new chassis he doesn't want us to know too much about yet. And Climhazzard, you are in the champion pool. But, you know, we haven't gotten to the champion pool yet, so who knows how well that's going to go. But you were second place in the sub pool. And a very strong round 1 in favor of Flypaste. Usually when we see a one-sided matchup like this, it's probably going to be round 2 in favor of Flypaste as well. This ship seeming to be very content with sitting back, which is probably for the best. If they get too close, those sentinel cannons can be a bit of an issue. And the ship's running in, dropping a mortar volley. I'm trying to back out, but running out of space and ending up colliding with each other is kind of a problem. I don't give a shit. I'll spoil everything. Ask me about that movie you haven't seen yet. I'll Google it just to spoil it for you. I'm a terrible person. I mean, I only spoil it if you ask, but I will absolutely spoil it, whatever it is. And Flypaste, like I said, takes round 1. Would be very surprised if round 2 went a whole lot different. Using the segments for aesthetics is a very eye-pleasing choice, but it does seem to be hurting overall fleet performance. And another big problem with the, and probably the main reason we don't see it often, like I mentioned before, he's got the 2x2 armor blocks surrounded by the 2 to 3 adapters, which the adapters cost 1 point, the 2x2 armor blocks cost 0, meaning that in a 3x3 block, he's spending 4 points, instead of what could be the same area spending 0. But I think Floof said he was going for aesthetics more than combat performance. And on that front, he's done very well. Flypaste performance degrading exponentially. He's lost twice as many ships this round as he lost last round, so you know, at this rate, he'll be completely gone very shortly. But that's it. This round is going in Flypaste's favor. We're as anticipated. When one round is generally one-sided, then the other round is pretty one-sided too. So unfortunate for Floof, but fortunately for Flypaste, it looks like Flypaste will be taking round 2 and winning the match. You can't steal my hope, that's my hope. Yeah, I don't have any kind of points things on here. a symphony of impact. And Flypaste wins the match. So up next we have Floof up against Dukeslayer, and I believe this is except for the ones where you have to use a variety of factions, I think this is the first time we've seen an actual Tinkerel submission from Duke. And I believe this is a recycled ship from a former tournament. Either that or just a slightly modified version. It just looks very similar to the Tinkerel support ship we saw out of one of the other tournaments from Duke's Heroes. But it did pretty well there, and I imagine it's going to do at least fairly well here. They were pretty well behaved, but before they had a front line to hide behind. And here they don't. So we'll see how much that affects them. The tiny stick-like shape of the cop-out fleet from Dukeslayer is kind of advantageous, but also kind of a problem. As they try to reorient themselves, they end up pushing themselves around a bit, and we saw a little bit ago one of them decided to take a stroll through the middle of the enemy fleet, and it worked out that time, but I never hedge my bets on that sort of thing working out. But Dukeslayer's fleet racking up a pretty solid point lead. Looks like he'll be taking round 1 at the very least. I don't think he'll be able to clean the field of all of these sentinels, but point wins are still wins. 3 subpools, Kamikaze. So the top 2 from each pool get to move on, as soon as we know who the top 2 of each pool are. Have a sorry about your luck pool, where it's just the people that didn't manage to do well in their own pools. I might consider that, if depending on time and whether or not I can come up with a name that's not derogatory. But Dukeslayer taking round 1 with a pretty hefty point lead. These little ships from Dukeslayer are not actually worth very many points. They're only 2k each, so even though one is down, it's not a huge loss, and there's no real synergy between them. It's a homogeneous build. So they don't really need each other to be alive. In fact, you can see a few of them kind of like bumping into each other and bumbling about. Losing a few ships might not be the worst thing that happened to Dukeslayer's fleet. But you can see him scoring some more points here, trying to move on. And with the clock running down, looks like Dukeslayer will be taking the match. Solid showing from these little tinkrels. But next we have the Nerazon by Toxico and Incendio. This is a Terran fleet, which these big guys you can see are predominantly using missiles, but they've got a lot of reverse thrust, so they're going to be trying to kite. This thing is using autocannons, so it's probably going to end up dying, at least to this fleet. But we'll see how well the distractors actually do their job. If the distractors do their job correctly, then they could keep Floof's fleet busy for a while. But a few hits from these sentinel cannons will tear apart all of these little ships. Toxico Waste Incendio is one guy with 2 aliases. Not really sure why he wants to use both, but he does, and that's fine. And Kamikaze, I've been trying to think of a good way to do a team pool. There are a few challenges in having a team or cooperative pool, and I'm not entirely sure how to work them out. The big problems I'm seeing are that some people will want to stack teams, and so do I allow that, and then anyone who doesn't have a teammate just randomly assign them someone else or something like that? Or do I get everyone to submit and then just randomly pair people up? In which case, you know, people will feel like they got gypped by the random number generator. And then the other option, all the submissions, should they be even, or should one person's fleet be designated a support fleet? So, you know, in like a 16k pool, would one person design 12k and the other design 4k, that kind of thing. And it does look like Floof is going to be taking this one. The segments are nowhere near as durable as the armor plate, but the segments are still fairly solid compared to a lot of the other factions' offerings. And Waste Incendio doesn't have a whole lot of health on the field anyway. And this guy appears to be mostly stuck. Yeah. So Floof takes round 1. Oh shit. Toxico only has a 16k fleet. I did not notice that. Well, that is my mistake, I suppose. There's not even enough spare ship count to finish filling it out anyway. Flypaste. The problem with picking pairs beforehand is if I pick pairs at the beginning of the month and then somebody finds out about the tournament and wants to join halfway through the month, what do I do with them then? And yeah, so I'd like to apologize to Floof. I apparently didn't notice that his fleet was 16k rather than 32. Or apologize to Toxico. I didn't notice his fleet was 16 instead of 32k. I have caught that on a couple of other fleets. This is just me dropping the ball. But Floof did finally get his win. Up next we have Climhazzard up against Excerpt 7. I'm not entirely sure how this is going to go. I think, is Climhazzard using yeah, Climhazzard has to be using torpedoes. But those sentinel cannons are going to do a number against anything that they hit. The only thing they're going to have a hard time killing is the freighter. But you give sentinel ships enough time, they'll cut through anything. They don't care. Yeah, one of the other options I thought about for the support, or for the co-op tournament, is giving people the option of finding a partner or just using a static fleet as their support fleet. That might also be an option. The problem with a cooperative sort of thing like that, I think the way Deluxe handles it is everybody submits 2 fleets, one as their main fleet and one as their support fleet. At least I think it was Deluxe, I can't necessarily remember. But Climhazzard is taking a very big lead on this one. But the way I remember the support, or the cooperative fleet building happening before, is that every person would submit 2 fleets, a large one and a small one, and then the small ones would get randomly paired up with the large ones after all the fleets had been submitted right before the tournament. But as we saw last round, a very good showing from Climhazzard. The Sentinel cannons were unable to sufficiently destroy the freighter, which you can see one of the large Sentinel ships has decided that the freighter is the ideal target. In the meantime, the other Sentinel ship is getting taken apart by all the plasma cannons on those spinners. Those spinners are really just shitting out damage, aren't they? Yeah, you can see the massive chunk of ship just disappearing. I believe Exderp 7, you can see he's got the several different colors of armor plating on his ships, so I think he is using the core hull segments and things like that as well, which you can kind of see after they break out or break through the outer layer of armor, the spinners are tearing through significantly faster, and I think the whole point of that was to save some mass, because the armor plates are very durable, but they're also very heavy, and being heavy means you have to invest more in thrusters. But Climhazzard wins the match. So up next we've got Flypaste up against Climhazzard. And you can see both fleets breaking out and sort of skirmishing all around the map. Nobody's really engaging all of the heavy ships from Climhazzard's fleet, which is really advantageous for Flypaste. As Clim mentioned, a large portion of his investment is in those spinners. And so the spinners not being close enough to actually engage anything is really good for Flypaste. But as we can see, Climhazzard's starting to pull away. Ship counts are still in favor of Flypaste, but overall score is a pretty good way of measuring how much damage a fleet has sustained. And you can see that Climhazzard is pulling away on score, and now with the ship count starting to even out a bit, looks like momentum is moving more and more in favor of Climhazzard's fleet, and you can see some of the heavy ships out of Climhazzard are finally getting engaged. It's going to be a problematic matchup for Flypaste. And it looks like round 1 is going to go in favor of Climhazzard. So now I'm kind of curious. Which has been the greater count? The number of top 2 participants in pools or the number of bottom 2? Like which one of those samples is larger? Yeah, so how does one constitute the best loser? Is that the one that defeats the most losers, or is that the one that loses the most? What does the best loser actually entail? And you can see over here Floof's fleet getting very distracted by the heavy ships from Climhazzard, occupying half of his fleet down here. I think that's going to end up being pretty problematic for Flypaste. Don't judge me. I am but a man. If that's the first mistake you've noticed on this stream, you should pay a lot more attention. I've made several. But it does look like, with a pretty big and continually growing lead, seems as though Climhazzard's going to be taking round 2 as well. Terran supply fleets are just too damn dangerous, I guess. And Climhazzard takes the match. So up next, we've got the Terran supply fleet by Climhazzard up against Cop Out by Dukeslayer. Now in my testing, Tinkerel does very poorly against very large numbers of Terran missiles. So maybe Dukeslayer will do well here, but in my experience, Climhazzard has a considerable advantage. The finest of fine mall cops. And Dukeslayer is doing rather well so far, at the very least. With only 30 seconds left in the round, or about 30 seconds left in the round, it does look like Duke will be taking round 1. It's a pretty hefty point lead, and it can turn around very quickly due to the nature of Terrans, or due to the nature of Tinkerel ships, but it does look like Duke is going to be able to at least squeeze away round 1. Which does give me a bit more confidence in how he's going to perform in round 2. And there you have it. Now we can see a little bit more of what I was expecting. As right off the bat, 2 of Dukeslayer's ships are just immediately vaporized, and now they're getting cut to shreds by the missile volleys. He might still be able to turn this around, but he's off to a much worse start than last round. But Duke has managed to pull away a point lead. Let's see if he's able to hold on. His ships are very well behaved. You can see they, against slower targets, they do a pretty good job of keeping up time, as long as they don't have to evade incoming fire. And monogun Tinkerels typically aren't all that effective, but Dukeslayer's fleet is pulling it off very well. And Floof, I have done, I call it the Unsung Heroes event, which is where Terrans, Tinkerel, and Sentinels are banned. You're allowed to play Farmers, Bees, Reds, and, Crystals? That one was a pretty neat event. It's been a little while since I've done that one, though. But a very big lead now in favor of Dukeslayer. You can see he bled a lot of points early with those couple of losses, but his fleet hasn't really taken a whole lot of damage since then. I think he owes a lot of it to the fact that his ships, when they get up to speed, are faster than the missiles. Which is one thing I don't think I can really say about any of the ships I've tested, and that's clearly having a big effect. But Dukeslayer wins the match. So up next we have Climhazzard up against Toxico, Waste Incendio. Given the erroneous nature of Toxico and the highly successful nature of Climhazzard, I'd be very surprised if this didn't go in favor of Clim. Yeah, if you want a Red Titan, just ask Splinter about his landing strip. He'd probably more than happily show you. Yeah, the little ships from Toxico are, they've got a lot of forward and a little bit of turn. And not a lot else. They are largely uncontrolled. And you can see another powerful round from Climhazzard here. This is going about as one would anticipate. But Climhazzard wins the match. So next up we have Exderp 7 up against Flypaste. The torpedoes I think are going to be very useful here, especially you can see them shredding the outer layers of protection, and once those go down, the interior is all the auxiliary and core hull or whatever. I forget which one they actually were, but the interiors are going to be much softer than the exterior layers, and you can see the color pattern shift. So he's got 3 different colors of armor in his fleet. This is almost certainly armor plating, which leads me to believe that this gray stuff is the core hull and the light gray is the interior, or the auxiliary hull, which leads me to believe that once the outer layer of any of these ships goes down, Exderp 7 ships should fall pretty expediently. And between the antimatters and torpedoes, I think we're going to see a lot of success out of Flypaste in this encounter. Hey man, hoping someone's Amazon package arrives late, that's just not cool. I'm pretty sure that's against the Geneva Convention, wishing that on somebody. How to beat Sentinel. Prepare for things that have a lot of health. Ironically, that's largely how you beat Terran too. At least most Terrans. I don't know that I've seen a very kitey Sentinel ship. They just don't really have the armament to support it. But we can, I think we can say that round 1 is going to go in favor of Flypaste. And with the way that round 1 has gone, I think we can probably expect round 2 to do very similar. Spinners can kind of kite, but the Sentinel weapons are all roughly in the 1500 range category. They've got the missiles are much longer range, but missiles are very inefficient and overall not great sources of damage for the Sentinels. Nukes are banned, so those aren't really an option. They are just on the permaban list. Then we've got the only other weapons that really have a greater range than that, I think, are the gauze beams, which I want to say are about 1800, and the obliterators, which I think are somewhere around there too. Everything else is about the plasmas and the annihilators are all 1500 range, which puts them in the brawl category rather than the kite category, in my opinion. Yeah, obliterators I think it's a bug I've seen people talk about every once in a while, where if the laser is beyond a certain width, it just penetrates things arbitrarily, even when it really shouldn't. Of course, the obliterator has the downside of being a 2700 point weapon, so, you know, if you lose your obliterator ship, sucks to suck, I guess. Yeah, the obliterators, from what I understand, because of the width of the laser, they just pretend shields just don't exist. They just go right through them anyway, and destroy whatever was around the shield generator. Something like that. But round 2 looks like it's also going to be going in favor of Flypaste. So I suppose the secret to dealing with Sentinels is to pretend Sentinels don't exist, in Flypaste's own words. And Flypaste takes the round. So now we have an Extirp 7 up against Dukeslayer. Dukeslayer we saw do very well up against Climhazzard's fleet, and Climhazzard had a lot more long-range damage projection than Extirp 7 does. So I anticipate that Dukeslayer will do rather well in this round as well. At least in this first round, Dukeslayer has a rather big advantage in that some of Extirp 7's ships decided they wanted to be embedded within one another. They just couldn't stand to be separate. But Duke is taking a huge point lead. Honestly, the Tinker will fare a lot better than most against nukes. That is one of the few places where Tinker will just straight up outclass everyone else in durability. Nobody resists nukes quite as well as Tinker will do. And with round 2, Dukeslayer building up a very big point lead. It looks like he's going to be able to do it again, showing that the first round's performance was not a fluke. Fluke does rhyme with Duke. That is a good point, Splinter. Alright, so now we have Extirp 7 up against Toxico. I can't imagine Toxico's fleet's going to do terribly well here. Low overall damage output, half the fleet budget against Sentinels. It's not promising. I was going to when I noticed it, but he's using 26 ships. Doubling that would bring it up to 42, and there's a 32 ship limit. So doubling it would have made it illegal, you know. I said 56, didn't I? I mean, I try to make it a habit of not tinkering with people's fleets. I don't make decisions about your fleet composition. I don't modify anything in your fleet. The only things I'll change are the name to make it match the name theming up at the top, and that's it. For a couple fleets, I did actually just double the numbers of ships, but that was because doubling it didn't require any real decision making. It was just the same fleet twice. Did I say 42? Whatever. Yeah. If you've only noticed one mistake so far in this stream, you haven't been paying attention. And Extra 7 takes the match. So next up we have Flypaste up against Dukeslayer. Dukeslayer been having a pretty good run of it, but this I think is the most mobile opponent he's fought yet. Dukeslayer does still have the advantage in range and mobility for the most part, but Flypaste has a massive durability advantage, and we'll see how that plays out. I think Flypaste is also using a few more missiles than a lot of the opponents that Duke has been fighting. But Duke's absurd mobility seems to be paying dividends in this matchup. These little gun sticks. I'm sure they have a name, but I'm going to refer to them as gun sticks because it's kind of what they are. Yeah, Floof, the AI in Reassembly is in kind of a weird place. It tries to be very smart, but it ignores most of the information that would be at its fingertips. And so it makes the best decisions it thinks it can, but it's like reading the headlines on a newspaper and making financial investments based on that. It's not going to pan out all that well most of the time. Broadsides would be very efficient if we had more ability to control the ships. If I could get a ship to orbit an enemy as opposed to trying to stand still in front of the enemy and fire, broadsides would work very well. And Dukeslayer takes round 1. The pretty solid showing. Enough that I'm fairly certain we can guess that round 2 is going to go very similar. And Flypaste, there's no losers pool right now, although the possibility exists. You know, all things are possible in due time. These Tinkerel ships are being very well behaved, as I've mentioned before. There are some tricks you can do to get a Tinkerel ship to behave a little bit better than it would normally, but I don't see Dukeslayer using any of them. I'm not exactly sure how he's convinced his ships to keep range. I think it has something to do with the muzzle velocity. Or perhaps it's just an advantage of being a mono-gun Tinkerel. Not entirely sure. And Dukeslayer wins match. So up next we have Flypaste up against Toxico, Waste Incendio. And so far we have a two-way tie for the lead, and we'll see how... Actually, I think we can probably guess how that's going to go, with the last matchup that Duke faces will be up against Toxico, who is at a colossal disadvantage. No, we haven't gotten to Splinters yet. Splinter was the last person to submit, I think. I swear he's got an alarm set for like 10 minutes before the cutoff, and that's when he submits his fleet. And Flypaste takes round 1. And overall, I think I'd be pretty surprised if this one went any different. I'm going to suggest that being afraid of what Splinter might have conjured is a pretty rational response. Just remember, one of the things Splinter asked me a couple days ago is, what was the rule on time dilation again? And Flypaste wins the match. So now we have Dukeslayer up against Toxico, and I'm fairly confident Dukeslayer is going to walk away with this one. But either way, it looks like we are going to have Climhazzard and Dukeslayer in the champion pool. So congratulations, guys. Both in chat. Feels good, man. I'd also like to point out, for any naysayers that were out there, saying that 20 Tinkle generators was too few, Dukeslayer's ships don't even have that many. I think he has, what, like 16 or 18, somewhere around there. I think people were saying that 20 generators wasn't enough for a Tinker fleet. But Duke's done pretty well on that amount. Double shifts, no breaks. Got a forest full of fairies to kill. And one stupid human named Zach. I'm getting a lot of dropped frames now all of a sudden. Are you guys seeing the stream okay? Yeah. Well, even with the stream out, the recording will be fine, so we're going to be seeing Climhazzard and Dukeslayer in the champion pool. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.